Good day, everyone. My name is Hector Guerra. I'm a member of Africa 21, a civil society organization based here in international Geneva, working to build bridges between this international hub and different actors working on and for sustainable development in Africa. It is my great pleasure to take part in this event today. This event is organized by Africa 21 in partnership with the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, and it aims at presenting critical insights from the latest analysis of sustainable development and technology. It is an honor and a great pleasure for Africa 21 to partner with ITU. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to welcome our participants, especially the members of the Africa 21 network of journalists specializing on sustainable development and climate change, respectively. We're happy to have you here today for this special briefing highlighting the transformative power of digital technology in advancing the sustainable development goals worldwide, with particular focus on Africa. We trust that today's briefing will allow the Africa 21 Journalist Network to have access to relevant, first-hand and quality information on the digital world and the SDGs. Before we continue, I would just like to make some quick logistic announcements. This briefing today is in English. It will be recorded, and I think that we're fine so far with the participants registering their name. We will have a series of presentations today, which will be followed by a Q&A at the end. If I understand correctly, you can the chat box will be open for your questions. I think that we are settled down for that, Julien, that the questions will be presented there. Okay, perfect. And in case someone needs to ask their questions in French, please feel free to do it, and we will translate them into English. And now, without further delay, I will hand over to David Hirsch, Senior Media Relations Officer at ITU. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Hector. Thank you also, Julien and Africa 21 for organizing this briefing on SDG Digital. We appreciate your efforts to promote sustainable development in the region and beyond, not only today, but throughout the year for Africa 21. I'll give a few notes about the partner organizations presenting today. The International Telecommunication Union is the UN specialized agency for information and communication technologies. You could think of ITU as the UN's tech agency. In so many ways, seen and unseen, ITU is committed to connecting the world. Working across 3 sectors, ITU's responsibilities include coordinating the global use of the radio frequency spectrum, working on standards so that communications and teletechnology can operate uniformly and interoperably across the world, and also working toward universal and meaningful connectivity. The United Nations Development Program, UNDP, is the leading UN organization fighting to end the injustice of poverty, inequality, and climate change. Working with a broad network of experts and partners, UNDP helps nations build integrated, lasting solutions for people and planet. And also Boston Consulting Group. Boston Consulting Group, or BCG, which is a knowledge partner for this project, partners with leaders in business and societies to tackle their most important challenges and capture their greatest opportunities. BCG works to embrace a transformational approach aimed at benefiting all stakeholders and empowering organizations. To set the context a little bit for everybody and provide some context, I would want to mention that ITU's latest data shows that 2.6 billion people around the world remain offline. These people are not only being left out of the benefits of digital technology, but they are falling behind. It's in this context, in the context of the halfway point in the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, that we're pleased to talk today to you about SDG Digital. As you will hear, SDG Digital was organized by ITU and UNDP to highlight how safe, inclusive, and scalable digital solutions can put the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs back on track, as they are at risk to miss the vision that was initially set in 2015. A key feature of SDG Digital is the SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda. This was developed by ITU and UNDP with Boston Consulting Group as a knowledge partner and the Inter-American Development Bank as the agenda supporter. Our first speaker today will be Alex Wang. Alex is Senior Advisor, Strategic Engagement and Initiatives in the Executive Office of ITU, and he has the responsibility for SDG Digital, among other initiatives at ITU. For 3 decades, Alex has worked on building partnerships that address development challenges. After Alex, we'll give the floor to Robert, Chief Digital Officer at UNDP. Robert is currently the Chief Digital Officer, and within that program, UNDP is working on sustainable development across 170 countries globally with more than 17,000 staff. He leads the agency's digital transformation and an organization-wide effort to harness the power of new technology to improve the lives of those that are furthest behind. I'm also pleased to note that we have Michael Willems, Partner and Director of BCG. Michael is a core member of the Technology, Media, and Telecommunications practice at BCG and has worked extensively with leading telcos for more than 15 years on multiple projects, with a focus on network strategy and rollout and on B2B commercial strategies. Please note that our guests will only be able to address questions related to SDG Digital and the SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda. I also want to reinforce that this briefing is officially in English language, and that officially for its use, it will be in English. So we try to reinforce that to the extent possible. If questions can be provided in English, answers certainly also will be provided in English. We'll also ask our moderator, if possible, to identify only those questions that relate to SDG Digital and the SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda. With that, allow me please to welcome our first presenter on SDG Digital, Alex Wang of ITU.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues, for joining. I know for some of you, it's also a public holiday, so we really appreciate taking the time to hear a little more about our SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda, and in that context, also the SDG Digital Day that we held on September 17th on the occasion of the UN General Assembly. So maybe I'll begin with, why did we do this? And we did this focus on the role of digital in the SDGs is because we all know, I think many of you know the statistics, that the SDGs are significantly behind. Since 2015, progress on 50% of the SDG targets is weak or insufficient. And on 30% of these targets, they've even stalled or gone in reverse. And in the year 2020, we saw the first case of global extreme poverty in almost 2 decades. And so the world is in a crisis. The SDGs are in a crisis. At the same time, we know that digital technologies are transforming governments, economies, and societies. And many of you are familiar with digital technologies. And we know that digital has a role to play in the SDGs. And so we began the work of SDG Digital and the work of the SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda with that very question about how can we, first of all, take stock of where we are in the SDGs, and how can we analyze what is the role of digital in helping accelerate progress to the SDGs. This really comprised what we call Section 1 of the Acceleration Agenda. It also comprised what we called Act 1 on the SDG Digital event, where we took stock of the current situation. We presented the results of some of our analyses on the role of digital on the SDGs, and we sort of laid a foundation to say, look, this is something that we as a global community can take advantage of. A key fact or statistic that we shared that is also highlighted in the Acceleration Agenda is that out of the 169 SDG indicators, so the indicators that comprised progress on the 17 SDGs, 119 of them, so just around 70% of those indicators, we analyzed and concluded that those 70% of those indicators have a direct impact or indirect impact on how digital can help advance progress on those particular indicators, showing a really strong correlation between digital and SDGs. We also conducted a lot of analysis to try to demonstrate for countries at a country level that those countries that adopted digital more comprehensively to try to show also the correlation that there was a positive correlation in SDG progress. So all that data is part of our section 1 of the agenda. Section 2 of the acceleration agenda, and also what featured as part of what we call Act 2 on September 17th, was now showcasing solutions. We wanted the acceleration agenda to be not about just analysis and discussions, but also showcasing use cases. And we conducted a global scan of around 400 different use cases, and we selected for each SDG 2 use cases where we highlighted why this particular use case could demonstrate the role of digital in advancing progress in that SDG. And these use cases were picked because of their demonstrated impact already, their partnership approach, and also their potential for scaling. So those use cases, Michael will go into a little more detail on some of those, especially those that applied for Africa. And then the final section of the report focused on what we call the acceleration. So how can we now lay down some guidelines for governments now to embrace digital and do it the right way, to do it the most effective way? And here we discussed a set of digital transformation enablers, where we went into structured on how we need to have the different levels of leadership on the non-technical level, but also on the technical level, what are the key enablers? And in that context, one of the key elements of the technical enablers are tied to the digital public infrastructure topic, which also comprised a major event also on SDG Digital Day, where we launched the UN High Impact Initiative on Digital Public Infrastructure. And my colleague Rob will go into that in a little more detail. A final comment on the acceleration agenda, where we also touched a bit on the role of emerging technologies. And that includes not just AI, which I think is on everyone's agenda, but also things like Internet of Things, 5G, the role of distributed ledger technologies like blockchain. And I would just highlight on that part, like all technology, technology has the power to do tremendous good, but also has a lot of downsides if you're not careful. So we do go into the report a little more about AI and what are some of the pros. And in fact, some of the use cases that we present in Section 2 report do use AI, but we also go and are very clear about some of the concerns that need to be taken into account. And I think we can address some of those later on. Michael might want to cover some of that in his comments, but we can also take those during the Q&A. So I'll stop there with a bit of that comprehensive overview of SDG Digital. Oh, I will say one more thing. I neglected to say that at the beginning. We were really pleased, and you can see that on the logos here, on the background, that we did SDG Digital with UNDP and ITU as the core organizations, but we really did that on behalf of the UN system. So we've had many UN agencies involved, both in contributing to the case studies, but also presenting their solutions during the SDG Digital event. We also had Boston Consulting Group as our knowledge partner. So they really served and worked with us throughout the entire process with a lot of the analysis and the insights. We also had Inter-American Development Bank also as a knowledge supporter, focusing on the financing topic. And finally, I should add that we had over 45 organizations be part of our SDG Digital Advisory Group, who helped give insights and shared and experiences as we created the acceleration agenda. And within Africa, I'm pleased to recognize Rwanda as being one of the member states that were part of the advisory group. Back to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. And we'll Robert Up from UNDP, Chief Digital Officer, please.
Thank you, David, Alex, and Hector and Julien, who are organizing this for Africa 21 and ITU. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this briefing. I just would add to what Alex was saying by focusing a little bit on one aspect of the SDG digital conversation, which is really around the concept that is emerging and evolving of digital public infrastructure. And what we mean by digital public infrastructure is essentially the technology and combination of technologies that governments put in place to essentially be like the digital roads and bridges that we have in the physical world. So the combination of technologies here makes it possible to have greater gains in terms of economic and social development. And I'll give some examples of that. For example, in some countries like India, there has been the development of a sort of digital stack around digital identity platforms, financial payment platforms, data exchanges, and other kinds of technologies that really make it possible to have greater financial inclusion among people and make greater progress economically as well. India estimates that they have received a 1.1% gain in GDP as a result of the combination of these enablers of digital technology being brought together. So we had during the event of SDG Digital last week, we had a specific focus on digital public infrastructure because we see this as really an important enabler in this overall push that we're making to accelerate the SDGs. We had about 8 different ministers there. We had 12 different organizations. We had a number of different speakers coming from all sorts of different perspectives. And we talked about how the digital public infrastructure really needs to ensure that it is affordable for everyone, meaning that we can use and reuse technologies that are developed in one country can be reused elsewhere. We talked about how they need to be safe for people, so we need to have the right protections and legal policies and frameworks in place to protect people. We talked about how it's necessary to really ensure that digital public infrastructure can be applied toward countries' green transitions and climate change actions. And so there were a number of different commitments that were made during the event. Some of them were financial in nature. So the country of Spain announced a $300 million fund for digital public infrastructure work in Latin America. Estonia announced a 20 million euro commitment to building more reusable technologies for digital public infrastructure. And the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation announced a $75 million commitment to really work toward increasing diversity in technologies that are being made available for digital public infrastructure. And then we had several African countries that were participating as well and made commitments. So for example, Malawi committed to being one of the first countries in Africa to achieve the SDG target 16.9, which is the extension of legal identity for all, including birth registration. Sierra Leone, which has been really a leader in this space, has also announced its commitment to working as part of a broader campaign of countries, really pushing toward ensuring that 50 countries in the next 5 years will be building their digital public infrastructure, and Sierra Leone is contributing to that overall effort. So this was a chance to really kind of look at how this notion of digital public infrastructure, these technologies coming together at a national level, established by a government, but then allowing for innovation from private sector companies and startups, and this kind of development of an ecosystem was really able to contribute to accelerating the Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, I will hand back over to David.
Thank you very much, Michael Wilms, again, partner and director of Boston Consulting Group.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think as David and Alex explained, we've been the knowledge partner for SDG Digital, which we've done with a lot of pride in being the foremost consultant when it comes to helping deliver the SDGs globally. I think a couple of highlights, partly already mentioned by Alex, which I want to pull out. First of all, in the first section of the report, I think we've shown very clearly that digital can help drive realization of the SDGs. As Alex mentioned, already about 70% of the SDG goals are currently impacted by digital solutions at substantial scale. So these could be hundreds of thousands of people being impacted by individual solutions, but similarly also thousands of acres of farmland being impacted by better farm productivity, etc. The other thing we've seen is that those countries that have made work around advancing digital infrastructure or making digital more affordable also have seen better and faster advancement on the SDGs as a whole. Our somewhat incomplete data suggests that it's about 40% faster, with a lot of more research to be done on that front. I think if we look specifically at Africa, there's a couple of examples that I wanted to highlight. First of all, and I think sort of probably very well known, obviously M-Pesa, which was one of the first digital money solutions, started in Kenya, but now serving over 50 million customers, sending, withdrawing, depositing money. I think most of you will know the solution. What we're seeing is that these kinds of solutions actually help substantially in reducing poverty and thus addressing SDG 1. Second example that I'd like to highlight is Atingi, which provides free access to locally relevant educational content across the global south. It's working with over 300 countries, for instance, in Rwanda, but in many other countries in Africa as well. And what we are seeing at these kinds of digital learning platforms, obviously in combination with people being normally at school, drive much better educational outcomes, and also can help drive educational skill gaps down also on digital skills, which obviously will be critically important in a digital society. And another one, which I think is really important around SDG 16 for peace and justice, is eyewitness to atrocities. So what this app does, it makes it really easy to capture various evidence, whether it's photo, video, audio, in a way that also ensures that it is admissible in court, e.g. ensuring that it's date stamped, location stamped, etc., so that we can use that very quickly to highlight all sorts of human rights violations, etc. And this is already being used, for instance, in Nigeria, Gambia, but also in the DRC. These are examples at the solution level. We've also looked at a number of countries which we believe have done a good job in enabling or pushing their country into a digital transformation at a holistic level. I think within Africa, we looked specifically at Rwanda, but there's definitely other countries as well that are heading in the right direction with the right push, like Sierra Leone, which was mentioned by Rob or Alex before as well. I think specifically what Rwanda has done is really push through the basic both digital skills, but also smartphone ownership in its population already for quite some time, which means that now digital literacy has quadrupled from 8% to 35% in 5 years. And I think it's these kind of national programs that are really needed to ensure that we can scale solutions like the ones I just described to really benefiting the whole of the population, but also ensuring that the whole population can benefit from a multitude of these kinds of solutions, which in the end would be needed if we are to realize the 169 specific targets under the 17 SDGs. And I think this is also where both pure connectivity, which the ITU is pushing, DPI, which ITU and UNDP together are pushing, are really showing why it's so important that these get built. These are the foundational building blocks on the technical level that will help drive the digital advancement. Next to that, we did also identify that there's quite a few non-technical requirements as well, which mainly center around leadership, but also ensuring that all of these solutions are human-centric, inclusive, adhering to a number of standards to also avoid misuse, limit the impact of all sorts of cybercrime, et cetera, et cetera. this agenda, what is needed to really push this forward and scale and accelerate the power of digital, is then the third chapter in the report that you can also find online. Let me stop there and hand it back to David.
Really, thank you. Thank you very much to all of our presenters from ITU, UNDP, and BCG. And thank you also Africa 21 for taking this part of the session forward with questions from journalists, with a reminder and an appreciation, a sincere appreciation and thank you for those that understand that we will conduct this press briefing officially in English and try to get as many questions as we can. And also if the questions can be related to SDG Digital and the acceleration agenda. Hector, thank you very much for taking this role of moderator, and I pitch it to you.
Thanks, David, and thanks to our panelists today. So the floor is open for your questions in English. You know what I'm calling on you and the participants to abide by the request in terms of language and in terms of content. So far, we have an initial question, originally in French, but which has been translated into English, coming from Africa 21's Julien Chambol. I think at this point, I can only see this initial question on the chat box, but I will ask you as the participants if you want to take the floor. I don't know if we have a raise hand function, but at least I think that we can already have a connection between our initial question and one of our panelists. So over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Hector. So of course, we're not skipping over the fact. In fact, what drove a lot of the work on SDG Digital was also recognizing that we have 2.6 billion people not yet even connected to the internet. And for those that have been tracking progress, last year it was 2.7 billion. So we've made some progress, though minimal. And I'm sure most of you know that of that number, roughly in Africa, the African community has only around 40% connectivity. So the contribution of Africa to the 2.6 billion is quite significant. We recognize the importance of connectivity because you can't take any advantage of digital if you don't have basic connectivity in a couple of ways. First of all, in our use case under SDG 9, which is tied to infrastructure, we highlight one of the initiatives that ITU is quite active in. In fact, I'm also the lead of this, so I can talk and answer questions around that, but that's our GIGA initiative that we hold with UNICEF, which aims to connect every school to the internet. And in Africa, we've been active in GIGA in Rwanda, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Niger, Zimbabwe, and we're getting some new programs tied to GIGA going in South Africa, Botswana, among some of the other countries that we're discussing. Now, GIGA, just very briefly, it's highlighted actually as one of the use cases, really takes an approach that by connecting every school, you're basically connecting the continent. You have to start by knowing where every school is. We call that the mapping element. And those then serve as the targets of where you want to have the connectivity, of which you want to use innovative public-private financing models. And once those schools are connected, the schools themselves then can serve as a hub to provide connectivity to the surrounding community. So that's a very concrete example of a project and a very active project that we have ongoing in Africa and directly addressing the connectivity challenge. The second thing I would just highlight is in our section 3 of the report, when we talk about the enablers that we've mentioned now a few times, and Rob talked about the digital public infrastructure, that of course also requires, before you even get into those kinds of topics, core levels or foundational enablers. It's all part of our digital transformation enablers graphic, but that includes connectivity, also the ability to process data through data centers, and also, of course, the computing infrastructure to leverage those things, and all of course, under security as well. So we have not forgotten that the connectivity has to be there as a foundation before you're able to achieve the benefits. Thank you.
Hector, may I come in on and add to that?
But of course, yes, please go right on, Robert.
Thanks so much. Just to build on what Alex said, another important thing to note about the digital divide that we see is that over 90% of the world's population actually lives in areas of coverage of mobile broadband. And so out of the 2.6 billion people that are not connected, most of them are not connected because of reasons other than actual availability of a network. They're not connecting because they don't have the right skill set. They may not be able to afford the devices or the airtime, to be able to be online. They may not have access to relevant content and services, or they may be concerned with safety issues online. And so ITU and UNDP, along with other agencies of the UN, very often work together on programs that look toward greater affordability, to look toward building a broader set of services that people can access, to make sure that people are able to use those devices with the right skill set. And there's large programs that go on and digital capacity building and things as well. So it's really important when we think about the digital divide, those 2.6 billion people, most of them could use the internet if they were able to afford, use, and so on.
Yeah, and maybe let me build on that point that you made as well, Rob, which I think is excellent. And even in the low income countries, 75% of the population is already covered by broadband. I think the other thing that we noticed is a lot of these benefits don't require every single one person to have a phone and be connected. I think healthcare is a great example. Sort of as long as the local healthcare worker has the ability to connect to the internet, work on a smartphone or a tablet, he or she can already access much better information, consult either some app or directly with another doctor somewhere remotely, and does help tens, if not hundreds of people locally that don't have the access personally. Education, you see similar dimensions. Also, when it comes to some of the solutions we see around getting more productivity out of farms as well. So what we are actually advocating is that we need to do both things in parallel. Obviously, we need to ensure that the 2.6 billion people that are not connected get connected, but that doesn't mean we have to wait in scaling the other applications, because if we can get the healthcare, the education, farming, etc., to benefit even when there's still people not connected, that's fine, right? Everything counts. And I think that's also what we want to achieve in Digital Day, is to ensure that there's no need to wait until we solve all of the problems in the foundational layer. There's enough in place already now to also get tangible benefits across all of the SDGs.
Thank you very much. As you see, we have already a few questions here. We have 2 additional questions. Sorry, I thought I was, we have the translation into English of our initial question from Julian. I hadn't posted it correctly. It's already there. It's specifically related to ITU, as is another question we have from Hadir, an environmental journalist from Egypt. There you have it. How does the ITU contribute to achieving the goals related to adaptation to climate change and clean energy? And as you can see as well, we have this question from Ernest Agbota from Radio Télévision du Bénin. Science and technology and innovation provide the foundation we need to move towards achieving the SDGs. What is Africa's place in this relevant debate in a context where it has poor internet connectivity? So back to our panelists, in addition to what they have presented thus far, their presentations and their initial responses. The floor is open.
Well, Hector, it's Alex again. Why don't I start with the question on ITU and the climate green question. So, of course, within the SDG digital acceleration agenda and the use cases, we do profile use cases from all the SDGs. So we do have the use cases that talk about what needs to be done or what can be done with digital in terms of things like oceans, life, the climate. Now, specifically to the ITU, so this is not slightly off topic from the SDG Digital, but we are really pleased that at the ITU that we have received a mandate from member states in our last plenipotentiary to really look at the green agenda. And so this has been the impetus for the launching of what we're calling the Green Digital Action Track. And it's really going to take its shape at the COP28 agenda. So the Green Digital Action Track is basically a multi-stakeholder partnership platform where we are working with, in particular, our sector members, the industries, and looking at a variety of mitigation, adaptation, and monitoring topics. And we plan to have a full program of activities at the COP28. And based on that, and based on how those go, we're going to look at how we can take that agenda forward beyond COP. I know Rob is on the call because Rob also plays the hat in another initiative that ITU is part of, which is the Codes initiative, which is also about ICT and green. I know this is slightly off topic from the SDG Digital, but that is a major program that many UN agencies are driving, including UNDP. ITU is part of that coalition as well, and there's a broader set of activities related to the Codes program, CODES, if you want to look that up on the internet. So I'll stop there on that question and let my other colleagues add anything or also address the second question. Thanks.
Yeah, Alex, if I can come in on the question around green and climate, if I can extend that just a little bit to kind of explain some of the approaches that we take. And this is, again, you know, UNDP is very active in the climate space, and we have a portfolio of around $3 billion of climate change action. So there's a lot of potential for digital technologies in the climate space. And we see things like, for example, connecting small farmers with Internet of Things technology to understand soil moisture levels or nutrient levels and things like that. We see the possibility to use satellite imagery to be able to understand patterns for agriculture, good practices, and where there's problems and things like that. We've got, and then when we talk about support to governments in their climate work, Alex mentioned some of this, but we are working on, for example, building out the technology that would help governments track their carbon emissions and actually their carbon capture as part of their commitments to the Paris Agreement. So UNDP works with about 100 countries worldwide on their tracking and tracing of their Paris Agreement commitments. And we have been building a digital public good layer of a tracking system for countries to be able to trade carbon with, so that African countries, for example, could trade their carbon credits with European countries, as one example, which is provided for in the Paris Agreement. And so there's lots of possibility here to really make progress and help governments make faster progress in terms of carbon emissions. Some work that we did a while back estimates that we can definitely accelerate by about 5 years the achievement of commitments in carbon trading, or rather carbon emissions that have been committed to as part of the Paris Agreement if we take these approaches. But we do that, as Alex said, in partnership, of course, with other agencies like ITU and others. I should say Namibia, just on the continent, Namibia has been the first country in the world who's adopted that carbon registry platform that we built, and the link is in the chat.
Thank you for that, Robert. And just as Hector comes back to us in moderating, I would also want to mention, and I did not mention in the outset, that at least for ITU, that we do have a regional office for Africa, and I know that Robert and BCG, UNDP and BCG have a tremendous presence across the region. I did want to acknowledge the presence earlier of one of our colleagues from that regional office. But for the moment, Hector, if I can bring it back to you for any additional questions. Yes, of course.
So we have two additional questions. One from F. Bonihanyuke, sorry. how to access data for countries lagging behind. You can also find it in the chat box. And then there is another question from Julien Chabol. There you have it. We've heard a lot about artificial intelligence. Is Africa in this revolution? Can the panelists give us some examples about African research centers and innovations in this field? And of course, once again, asking our dear participants if they have a question they would like to ask directly in English using their mics, please let us know. But I'll let our panelists to get to those questions I just asked. The floor is yours if you want to have any response to those questions. Over to you. Alex, you want to take the floor?
I can start, and then I was going to defer to also Michael. Maybe want to jump in on the AI question. Maybe perfect. I just want to touch to start off with what we sort of highlighted in the report. I know the question specifically about Africa and are there examples of what's happening in Africa, but let me defer that to other colleagues. In general, on the AI, and I mentioned earlier that in the report we did look at specifically the emerging technologies and how they can play a role in helping with progress on the SDGs. In the case of AI, we wanted that we'll just highlight again what we know are some of the concerns that that many of you have or many of the public has, and we highlight the fact that for AI to be effective, it has to overcome some of the challenges or the perceived challenges, which we would highlight as the following. First of all, since it draws on data, make sure that the data has the right representation and the right inclusion and diversity. Secondly, that the public in particular understands and that there's transparency and accountability. So how do some of these AI algorithms work? Third, the regulation or the lack of regulation and standards on how AI is to be used, both at the international or global level in particular, and also at the obviously regional level. And then finally, the heightened concerns tied to security and cybersecurity. So maybe I'll start off with that kind of partial response, because I think it's good to sort of frame, how we thought of AI in the context of progress to the SDGs. As in all technologies, there is tremendous opportunity, but also a lot of caution. So we did want to highlight in particular the issues or the challenges tied to AI. Now, in terms of examples of what is Africa doing in AI, this is where I do defer to Michael. I don't know if you have a answer on that one, or Rob, you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I have some answers. Obviously, I think the first answer is that we need more homegrown AI solutions, and in general, more homegrown digital solutions in Africa and in other emerging countries as well. We also hosted an event last week where we highlighted that only about 2.8%, if I'm right, of open source contributions globally are coming from Africa. Obviously, that's way too little. And I think that also applies to data, by the way. I think there's two kinds of gaps of data. One is just basic data, and I think if you go to any website with data from the UN, World Bank, etc., there's typically less data on Africa than on other countries, which in itself is a problem. But as we move to AI, this issue will become more and more prevalent. For instance, so that if we don't get a large language model in many of the African languages, that may make it much harder for Africans to benefit from generative AI, etc. There are some green shoots here as well. I think there are some leading companies in Africa already working on AI, applying AI capabilities. I know some of the telcos, including MTN, Safaricom, are deploying AI not only in their internal operations, but also, for instance, to identify patterns of phone usage that would indicate certain poverty or other circumstances that affect individuals, which may provide triggers to act on. We also do see now a startup of a number of AI centers in Africa. I think there was one just launched in the Republic of Congo, around how can we create African research on artificial intelligence and ensure that we get African specific use cases in AI, and also how can it then be deployed in the specific cultural context all across Africa. So lots to do, but also some green shoots to build on. Rob, I guess you have something to add on this as well.
Just quickly, because I think you've covered it fairly well. The answer to the question is there is a risk that Africa is not going to keep up, and we are very much sensitized to that and looking at ways that we can work to make sure that the local digital ecosystems in Africa, as Michael said, are receiving more support. And so we need better skills, we need better data, we need better models for artificial intelligence. There was a question on some centers and things. The kind of the hotspots of tech in Africa, South Africa, Nairobi, Lagos. There's massive amounts of interest and activity in the space of startups and things working in this. I think that if I'm not mistaken, the UN Economic Commission for Africa has an AI center in Congo Brazzaville of some kind, and there are, I know, a number of universities across the region that are also very active in this space as well. We are responding to country requests for support with AI strategies. There are a number of countries that already have strategies in place. Rwanda is among them, but many countries are building their artificial intelligence strategies in terms of how do they, as countries, promote innovation while protecting people. And this is something that we, as UNDP, have been active in supporting with a tool that we call the AI Readiness Assessment, where we work with countries to look at the capabilities that they have in society as well as within government to be able to manage artificial intelligence. So just a few additional thoughts there.
Thanks to our panelists for this this new round of replies. As we're coming to the end of today's briefing, I would like to open the floor once again to our panelists for their final round of comments, if any. And we have a last question. You feel free to respond it as part of your final remarks. Is there an economic estimate of the potential of the artificial intelligence sector in Africa over the next few years? But I think part of this has been addressed. So over to you. And right after that, we have one final announcement before we wrap up. So the floor is open to our panelists. Please go ahead.
I am not aware of I'm not aware of a financial, or sorry, an economic estimate. I'm sorry, I'm not aware that one has been done, but it is possible it's out there.
Maybe I'll jump in now with some, I guess, kind of doing our summary or wrapping work. And I thought of a question that was asked in an earlier briefing that we had on earlier in the day is what is the role of the journalists, and all of you are taking the time to learn about what we did and the role of digital in the SDGs. So I would just sort of suggest, first of all, it's great that you're here to try to transmit to your audiences the potential benefits, but also the risks of digital. So that's always important because people move ahead very quickly with a lot of things, and they don't properly look at the role of digital. But of course, the core connectivity challenge, as many of you have raised. The second thing I would say is, there's a lot of interest in AI as per the questions here, and I think the community on this call has a big role to play to help the public understand the pros and the cons of AI, because there is a lot of misinformation there. So we've touched on some of the themes here. They're also echoed in the acceleration agenda. So, please continue to ask the questions to us, and also please continue to share that. And the final item, which Rob touched on, but Myself also knowing that DPI, digital public infrastructure, there's a lot of talk about that. So it's one of those phrases that can be jargonized. So I think Rob could add to this too. I think the press has a real role to play to sort of help stakeholders, governments think about their digital transformation properly, because one of the key messages of DPI, as Rob said, it's about being smart and efficient on how you roll out your digital strategies in a country and use building blocks that already exist, so you don't have to repeat, and create parallel, silos in your own government or across governments by having completely different applications. That's one of the messages of DPI. So, helping for you to unpack that jargon into language that the average person could understand, or that your governments can understand, I think is going to be really important, because that's part of what our commitment is as one of the outcomes of SDG Digital, is take the DPI agenda forward. Maybe I'll stop with that, maybe summary on my part, pass it over to my colleagues. Thank you.
I would just add, Alex, that's a great point. One of the whole issues around the use of technology in general, but particularly this concept of digital public infrastructure, is that as these systems evolve, some countries have found combinations that are very effective. And we, as the United Nations, want to make sure that those models, those examples, those experiences, and even those technologies are made open and freely available to the rest of the world that is really looking to accelerate digital transformation using the same kinds of approaches, because countries everywhere are solving the similar kinds of problems. And so we want to help the acceleration of that by, as I said, sharing what has worked, sharing experiences, even sharing the technologies. So leave it there.
Sorry. Thank you very much. Michael, any final remarks? Sorry, we cannot hear you, Michael. You froze. We see. Sorry, at least I cannot hear you, Michael. I don't know if you have anything else to say. In the meantime, I will hand over to David. Please go ahead, David.
Yeah, Michael, please feel free to interrupt me if you're able to come back on. It's not apparent if perhaps your link is frozen, but certainly if you did want to conclude with some remarks. I would just say from our side that with appreciation for folks that have joined the call and folks that were not able to, but yet I recognize have interest in these issues and are connected to Africa 21. We will make sure that available to you will be a full set of assets that relate to SDG Digital and the SDG Digital Acceleration Agenda, including the report, including videos, including links and information on our organizations and the presenters today. We also wouldn't impress upon you that we are available to you if you have additional questions. They could be channeled our way. So thank you for that from our side. I again send it back to you, Hector, to take it to the next step.
Thank you, David. And of course, Michael, if we manage to sort this glitch out, please feel free to jump in for your final comments. In the meantime, I will hand over to Julien, who has an announcement.
I think, Hector, that Michael has actually reconnected, so that'd be great.
Oh, okay, well then, bear with me, Julien.
My connection
over
works
to you,
again.
Michael.
Yeah, sorry for that. Sort of my computer froze. So I think, for me, the key closing remark would be, I think there's sufficient proof that already today digital can help in delivering against the SDGs. So the key thing now is to make sure that each and every country, each and every organization thinks about what are the key next steps, not only in ensuring that those 2.6 billion people get connected, but also in advancing the digital solutions that are already proven somewhere, adapt them to the local context, and start reaping the benefits.
Thank you very much. And with those words and joining Julian's message, thanks to ITU, thanks to our panelists, thanks to all those who behind the scenes have made this event possible. And of course, special thanks to our participants today. Have a great rest of the day wherever you are. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.